everyone. My name is Casey, and welcome again to Interventions episodes. Today, we have Shuya Gong with us from IDEO.
Hi guys, my name is Shuya Gong, currently in Cambridge, Massachusetts, near Boston, and I'm a senior designer at IDEO CoLab.
And today, Shuya is talking with us about collaborative design. So tell us about the collaborative advantage in design. What does it mean and why does it matter?
In one sentence, I think collaborative design is bringing together a bunch of multiple stakeholders to create disproportionately positive impact that no one organization can pull off alone. And I think it's especially well suited towards designing and also shifting systems, and really epitomizes that whole concept of the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. And so you guys had a fantastic episode on human-centered design. And I think one of the big takeaways there is that you're always centering back on the user. And in some cases, it's more appropriate to think about many users for a really complex problem or challenge that any one person couldn't go off and figure out themselves. And so I think there's definitely two pieces of this. There's the mindsets and the process. And so the process of collaborative design is a natural extension of human-centered design. It goes a little bit beyond designing for users to designing with them, which has always been the ethos of what we do. And that means that by inviting the right people, and usually a more diverse set of people than we normally get to see in the design process. By making sure that your process is really inclusive, you get to the actual right problems to solve and in a really holistic way. And so I think the mindset for collaborative advantage in design is one of abundance, and that is really different than the typical competitive advantage that you usually see in the business world. And I think it's recognizing that in many cases, it makes a lot more sense to be collaborative, not only with the people that you would normally think to work with, but actually intentionally working with competitors in order to shift your entire industry and innovate together. And so what you're doing there is the ability to invest in resources that might be risky to do alone, whether that's new technologies, whether that's talent, whether that's building out infrastructure that's shared together. And so I think what I would say about that is like collaborative advantage isn't the opposite of competitive advantage when you're designing for systems. It's more of a next evolution, and it's recognizing what parts are a part of your unique value prop as an organization, and where it makes sense to actually extend your ability and work with others. So I think like designing for a collaborative advantage really means efficiency and coordination towards the same goals. And a big side effect is just the ability to design the future together.
So what does the process of collaborative design at IDEO usually look like? Who's involved and how do you guys work together?
IDEO has continuously pushed the edge of, I think, how to design at scale. And keeping that in mind, I mean, human-centered design is still a crucial piece of our process as in the last webisode. But I think it's expanded beyond human-centered design to look at something that's more towards humanity-centered design. And if we think about IDEO 40 years ago, it really started with designing products, that iconic Apple mouse. And so designing products effectively shapes a moment in a user's life. And as we grew as a company and matured our design practices, we expanded to designing services and experiences, which I think shapes the user's life beyond that moment of interaction to an entire journey. And IDEO recently has started to think about designing for change and effectively shape the systems that users exist and interact in. And so some of that work happens at IDEO CoLab, which is where I spend most of my time designing, and we're IDEO's platform for collaborative innovation. And that means that it's a space to do both collaborative design and also to experiment and iterate on how to do collaborative design. And it's actually, I think, a pretty big shift in terms of how we operate as a design studio. This little space of IDEO CoLab carved out to try a few experiments with our model and how we do our work. And so instead of having clients, we have members. And I think that that's pretty key, not just beyond in name. it means that instead of project-based work at CoLab, we are on a membership model. And in a funny way, it's maybe a little bit of like a subscription model for the whole year instead of project by project-based work. But in all seriousness, what that implies is some really important things functionally about how we engage with people that we work with outside and external to IDEO. And it really is important, I think, for that collaborative process. A long-term relationship with your client, and I'll refer to them as members from now on because that's what I'm used to, means that we're looking 3 to 5 years out. And it means that we have the time and the resources to think about the future, which doesn't really exist in a silo. And that's the advantage of designing the future across industries and especially with your competitors. So the design work can happen over a course of multiple years. We're able to see trends and themes evolve, and we're able to anticipate what might change. And being able to do that, being able to have the long arc of design, means that we can untangle really complex problems and invite players to the table that normally you wouldn't have time to do so. And of course, what comes with that is something beautiful where you don't have to worry about, is my client singular going to be happy with the deliverables? And the mindset now actually shifts more towards what future are we trying to design together and how do we help each other do that? And that reframe of the design process and the client designer relationship, I think, is much more productive for everybody involved. So it gives us the time and space to not only design for things that are further out together with multiple stakeholders, but it also gives us the time and space to design new ways to do design. And I think that designing design is an equally important practice to do as well. So that's all context and theory for how collaborative advantage might look and exist at one part of IDEO at CoLab. But functionally, what that means for us is we start the year off with a really strong cohort of members that either span multiple industries or are working within the same industry at different levels of infrastructure. So, for example, in CoLab Futures, based in Boston, which is where I mostly am, and we look at the future of emerging tech and societal trends. And our members this year include NASDAQ, CSAA, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Takeda. So these industry giants that are at the top of looking at insurance, and whatever they do really tends to shift the entire field of where they're at. Whereas in the circular economy food CoLab, that's a portfolio that's going really deep into one industry. And so those members include Danone, Kroger, Electrolux. We've worked with McDonald's, Nespresso, Starbucks. And so each of those members are sitting at different levels within that vertical stack of the food industry. And so it means that if we shift things within that industry, the entire industry is able to do something a little bit different and a little bit further out. And we start the year off with what we call Hard Problems Workshop, which is really that ability to say, hey, let's zoom out, let's look at the hard problems that we're facing together as an entire system. What are the things we're most excited about tackling here? What's keeping us up at night? And what is going to be a really amazing and interesting and provocative research agenda to go out and build together? And so throughout the year, we run design sprints to both convene and to set time aside to be able to do that work together, create prototypes, design what those future systems might look like, and then we map it out together of what first steps towards a shift that we're interested in might look like.
So from a member perspective, have you found that this is something that they really want to do, that competitors want to come together and collaborate?
I think it's surprising. And I think that's actually the biggest draw for CoLab members. One of my favorite ways I've heard CoLab described in the past is a technological Switzerland. I was like the third space that's like totally okay to bring all of your questions and problems and what you're looking at in the future. And I mean, our members they're sometimes big enough to influence industries, right? And knowing what the next big thing might be that's coming out of an industry that's adjacent to theirs, or even analogous to theirs, is a big leg up in planning ahead, right? For example, a house and car insurer might be really interested in knowing what a health insurer is doing, because the future of insurance might look something like insuring me as a person and all of the things attached to me, instead of me insuring every individual asset that I have. But competitors that are really, really in the same space is actually where I think this gets the most interesting, because traditionally they don't like to work together, right? You have like trade secrets, corporate espionage, NDAs, and all of these things that are in corporate lore. And that's not to say that we don't do a good job of looking at IP and understanding the value of competitive advantage. But I think a lot of what we're doing at CoLab is actually pre-competitive, and it's looking over the edge. It's looking at emerging technologies and emerging social trends, and that can be risky for any one individual organization to invest in by themselves. Anything new is, and so industries that are particularly well suited to collaborative design, I think, are the ones that are looking to innovate and invest in the future. And so that pre-competitive nature of what we're looking at is actually really important. So, for example, in 2015, when we were exploring blockchain, it really made sense for companies in the financial industry to come together and research this nascent technology together, because in the initial stages, collaboration and pooling your resources is the only way you'll get from 0 to 1. And our exploration there ended up with our members, NASDAQ and Citi, launching Link, which was a platform for trading crypto securities together. And so you're sharing that responsibility initially of building out the infrastructure, the basic infrastructure, because you're all planning on sharing that infrastructure once it's built to create value for everybody. So when you are working in an industry that's already established, so not a shiny new technology that's coming up, it kind of works the same way. But now, instead of building new infrastructure, you are connecting existing infrastructure and optimizing that. And so, for example, it still takes collaboration, right? So our circular economy portfolio last year brought together McDonald's, Starbucks, and Nespresso to redesign the coffee cup. And for each of those three, I would say, competitors in the space of food and beverage, they know that their brand value isn't the cup itself. Like, people aren't going to these brands because of what material their paper cup is literally made out of. But by coming together and creating a new industry standard, it's something that their consumers might not know off the bat, but they realize in the back end of things, for the three of them to work together means that they're going to uplift the entire industry of food and beverage and shift all practices to be a little bit more sustainable. And so I think for competitors, like the big takeaway here maybe is that collaboration is the new competitive advantage. And that's what you need to do to be able to expand your capabilities as an organization.
You've talked a lot about how you work with these big industry giants. I was curious if this concept can be applied on a smaller level with like maybe smaller companies, or even on an individual level in terms of how you think when you're working.
We actually work a lot with startups because they're a really fantastic way of exploring edges and moving fast. And so entrepreneurship, I think is a signature collaborative advantage move. You got a startup that can move really fast, explore experiments, and then all the resources of a really big company to help with network and scaling up. On the other hand, if you're a collection of small companies, I think this is how coalitions and collectives come together, right? But as an individual and also individual organizations, I think the biggest mindset to have when you're working and trying to put yourself in a collaborative mindset is really abundance, right? As we talked about earlier. In that same vein, alongside abundance is inclusion. And those two things together really tunes your thinking to be more open towards finding what that advantage of working together might be. And sometimes, it might be waiting for the right time and the right players to all be aligned and to all be at the right moment, and for a catalyst to happen where it is now interesting to go pursue something together. So when you think about it, it's a little bit like lining up dominoes and seeing a chain reaction happen. It doesn't matter how big or small of a domino you might be in that chain, you're still a super crucial piece of that system working and shifting.
What would you say is the biggest challenge when it comes to collaborative design?
Vulnerability, for sure. I think, and inclusion, right? It's two parts of that. It's getting the right people at the table, and then it's setting the table so that everyone feels really comfortable and invited to contribute. And so whether you're working with powerful corporations or vulnerable populations, showing up in the right way that both fits their individual culture and styles of working, but also creating enough of a common ground for everybody to feel comfortable with each other isn't an easy task. And we're sort of reinventing ourselves all the time too, because the nature of collaborative design means that once you've succeeded in improving or changing the system towards something that you're going for, it's now just fundamentally different, and you need to get to know it again. And as new needs pop up, as new stakeholders come to the table, your process needs to change as well. And so vulnerability and inclusion are I think the two things that we're designing for constantly right now, but that could totally change in the future. And sometimes that process changes for a completely unexpected reason in these times. And we're kicking off a design sprint next week remotely. And it's actually a fascinating process for creating what we've been calling the IDEO CoLab remote design sprint toolkit, because we started realizing how many of those little organic, small, sometimes just conversational interactions that really make collaborative design work, that really make bringing together different organizations to the table really work. And recreating those digitally, I think, was an extreme exercise in realizing that level of interaction design and to create that level of comfort and vulnerability to work together on a challenge. So, I mean, I'm super excited about it. I think having a design sprint remotely and as a toolkit kind of means that more people can participate now from all over the world. And we ran a sprint last month across 4 countries and 5 time zones, which was just not something that we could have done in person. And it was incredible. It was incredible because I think it really tapped into that inclusion piece of opening it up to the field and to our real users, and being able to bring everybody to the same place in a way that we haven't been able to done before.
I guess the last question would be, what would you say is the biggest takeaway of collaborative advantage from a design student perspective? So what are some bite-sized ways to practice, given that these systems are a bit harder to prototype?
I think you want to diversify the lenses you use to understand the world. I mean, as a designer, you're sort of constantly being inspired, constantly exploring, but specifically here, learning why our systems are the way they are, so that you can understand how to shift them, right? So investing in your craft as a designer is so incredibly important, and continue doing that. Whatever tool it is that you bring to the table, whatever it is that brings your ideas to life, keep honing that, whether it's code, whether it's pixels, whether it's business models. But I think in flexing and building the muscles for collaborative advantage, there's 2 things that for me are super important. The first one is to practice intentional imagination. And the other one is critically identifying the tensions to design incentive mechanisms for. So, that one of those things is very high up in the abstract future, and the other one is super practical and very much in the tangible present. So 2 exercises that I think you can use to practice these. Highly recommend. Give them a go. Let me know how it goes. The first one is understanding the tensions in the present. And so I like using an activity called trio tensions to start. Super simple. You basically draw a triangle, and its intent is to strengthen your idea or whatever it is you're designing with a collaborative advantage boost, or just to know if you have the right people at the table and if they have shared interests. And so pretty simple. You draw a triangle, you put your idea in the middle of it, and then at each vertex of the triangle, put your stakeholders. So your idea, oops, I have a green screen turned on. 1 second, sorry. Behind the scenes. All righty. So now we're back to normal Post-its. Draw a triangle, trio tensions, your idea goes in the middle. At each of these 3 vertices, put a different stakeholder and their reason for why they are interested in investing in the idea in the middle. And then on the lines here, put the reasons why these 2 have shared interests, right? And so if you can close your triangle, if you can close all 3 sides of your equation, it means that you've got at least 3 really complex relationships where everybody is bought in to the central idea at the middle, and you have a clear understanding of how each of the individual partners are gaining a advantage from collaborating with each other. Super iconic triangle is like corporation, a government, and a community, right? You've got your public, your private, and like your normal everyday people. And adjusting those triangles, getting the multiple, the stakeholders as well as the tensions right, is a bit of an art, and it takes a little bit of time. But I think it's a really practical exercise in understanding the present, and it's pretty fast as well. But for thinking towards the future, I mean, this was a fun one. I honestly just recommend like reading or writing some design fiction. We look towards the future because it hasn't happened. Well, theoretically, so we can imagine it to be anything that we want. And Jane Fulton Surrey has a really nice way of explaining these. She calls them vision pulls. And so these like bite-sized teasers of the future that are story told in a way that's so compelling that people are willing to put in the work to get there faster, to go together. That's what's so important about the value of design fiction inside of the context of collaboration. And as my friend Joanne from CoLab would say, like any imagination of the future is a critique of the present. And I think that design fiction fills that role of being a fantastic way of highlighting the inefficiencies and opportunities for change in our systems today. And I think that those opportunities are usually filled when two or more organizations actually step up together to change it or to optimize it. And so we spend time as a team at CoLab doing this almost weekly. We created this activity called Postcards from the Future, which is just a time for us to get together, have some bite-sized explorations about what the future might look like. And it sharpens our muscle of imagining what might be later and spotting where collaboration makes a lot of sense, where we gain an advantage in it, and in creating really those vision pulls for why organizations might decide to come together.
What is your favorite organizational tool?
This isn't an organization tool, but I'm going to throw it out there because I think every designer should know this. It's Figma. It is. It's a flexible enough platform that you can really do whatever you want on it. But it's really incredible in getting people to all be on the same platform, looking at the same stuff, making stuff really quickly, and sharing in live time. Promise this is not a paid commercial segment. But the actual organizational tool that I love, it's still a digital one. It's Airtable. And for a company whose tagline is organize anything, they do a pretty good job of it. Relational databasing with a really beautiful UI is what I say that one is. And so I keep everything in there, to-dos, bills, coming up with teams for design sprints, keeping track of large events, small events, anything like that. So highly recommend. I don't actually, this is going to be terrible. My mom's going to be so disappointed. I don't actually organize things in the real space that often. My closet is a mess, and it's just going to stay that way. A little bit of chaos in your life keeps you creative, it's totally fine.
Okay, so what is your favorite writing utensil?
It's a black Sharpie felt tip. I'm actually a big fan of their fun fact, Sharpies have editions, and their newest edition is by far my favorite edition. And the difference is this is an older Sharpie. And you can tell because the point right here, the height, is a little bit shorter and a little bit more triangular than their newer brush tip version. Just means like the brush tip, you get a little bit of softness, you get a little bit darker ink, it's a little bit more give. But beyond the classic Sharpie, which I feel like is in the toolbox of every person who uses Post-its everywhere, it's the Papermate Flare black pens. I feel like these things fall, like I end up with 5 of them at the end of my laundry load every time because I stick them in random pockets of my clothes and then forget about them. But they're fantastic. It just something about the way they flow on paper works really nicely.
What is your favorite book? Book recommendation? Okay,
book recommendations. These are going to be at different levels of brain juice. So, you use these as you will. First one that's going to be top of mind probably for the rest of the year, Winners Take All. It is an incredible look at how philanthropy, consultants, and just big, powerful organizations do things that are good for the world, but takes a deeper dive in understanding why they do it and why they need to fulfill that function in the first place. And so Winners Take All of you, there's one passage in it as real fast pitch. There's a section in there that talks about poverty and inequality and how when you frame something up as poverty, it makes people feel like they can actually do something about it, towards it, help it out. When you frame a problem, that same challenge perhaps as inequality, it means that you have to come to terms with yourself as a person of privilege being a part of that system. And so that reframe and that reshift, that kind of goes on throughout the book. It's just explaining how organizations in positions of power understand that and sell it to the rest of the world. So that one's a great, like, existential, if you want to know about how the world and systems of power work, highly recommend. In that same vein, looking and exploring at power, highly recommend anything from Octavia Butler. I'm doing that recommendation with a grain of salt because I personally haven't finished some of her most critical works yet. But I think it's a valid recommendation given what I've seen so far. So science fiction exploration of the future. The other one that I think is really great for designers who are looking to understand how to change the world or how to think about futuring. Two recommendations here. The first one is "But What If We're Wrong" by Chuck Klosterman. It's an exploration of the present and the past a little bit, but an exploration of the present as if you were coming from the point of view of the future. Really fascinating stuff about, like, if our understanding of gravity is the same in 500 years as it is today, we will not have progressed as far as we did as from 500 years ago. And so that one also is one where I'm like, take this commentary with a grain of salt. Like, it will push you to ask questions about the world, and don't take it as absolute truth. And that's what it's meant to be. And then the last one, this one is a little bit more lighthearted for fun. Ryan North's How to Invent Anything, a stranded time traveler's guide to reinventing the universe. I think the title is a little bit different there. So when you look for it, just look up Ryan North, Inventing the Future. But fascinating book on how everything we have in our world today technologically really came to be, from language to agriculture up until, like, the internet. And the premise is that you are a time traveler that got stuck in the past and you don't know what year it is, and you have to reinvent your way all the way up to the year 3000. And that's the premise of the book. It's just very factual in a really fun way.
Okay, and lastly, what is your favorite eco-friendly item or non-plastic item?
Blue Land soap, I think is the name of it. But what they're doing is they're shipping you just the soap tablet and asking you to add the water yourself, which is a no-brainer. Like, it saves on shipping costs. You're not paying for the weight of the water being shipped. And in most cases, if you're in a situation where you're buying hand soap, you're also going to have access to clean water. And so I think that's just like a really compelling move on their part to say, we're going to sell you something that seems smaller and seems concentrated and maybe seems like you're getting less for your money, but you're actually getting a lot of value in other ways. And I think that's a really beautiful product expression of circular economy principles.
All right. Well, thank you for all those recommendations, Shuya, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Do you want to show us your invisible cloak trick one more time for the viewers?
Yeah. I'll do it. Okay. Little zoom trick here. I'm going to toggle on. I have a green screen and then pick this as the thing to disappear. Okay, here we go. Here's where the magic happens. So I feel like this is like a Mr. Rogers moment. Like, I feel like I should do this for every meeting that I have from now on. So you take your invisibility cloak, and then, it's just going to work, going to Zoom, putting on your cloak. And that's really it. That's like, you kind of just fade into the background and
wow.
And it's good. It's a good little trick.